Montana Territory, 1885. The dirt road leading to Silver Creek was as unforgiving as the men who traveled it. At least, that's what Zara Mitchell believed with every fiber of her being. At 22, she had seen enough of cowboys and their brutal ways to last several lifetimes, their violence having torn her family apart and left scars that no frontier doctor could ever heal. "Keep moving," she muttered to herself, adjusting the worn leather reins in her gloved hands. Her chestnut mare responded with a flick of her ears as they approached the small frontier town. Zara's blue calico dress was dusty from the journey, and she tucked a strand of her honey blonde hair back under her bonnet, conscious of the stares that followed a woman traveling alone. Silver Creek was meant to be her fresh start, as far from Texas and its memories as her meager savings could take her. The schoolteacher position awaited, and with it, the chance to build a life without depending on any man, particularly those who wore spurs and carried six-shooters. A woman alone is a woman at risk, her mother had warned before the consumption took her, especially among cowboys. Zara had taken those words to heart after watching her father, a gentle shopkeeper, beaten to death by drunken ranch hands while trying to protect their store. That night had taught her all she needed to know about the men who roamed the frontier. They were dangerous, unpredictable, and not to be trusted with anything, especially not her heart. What Zara wanted was simple: survive, teach the children of Silver Creek, and build a life of quiet independence. What she refused to acknowledge was the hollow ache of loneliness that settled in her chest on cold nights, when the howl of distant wolves reminded her how isolated one person could be in this vast, untamed land. The main street of Silver Creek appeared ahead, a collection of wooden buildings fighting to maintain dignity against the Montana wilderness. Zara straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and prepared to face her new beginning with the same determination that had carried her across 3 state lines. Miss Mitchell, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, hurried toward her wagon as she pulled to a stop outside the general store. "We've been expecting you. I'm Mayor Simmons. Welcome to Silver Creek." As Zara stepped down from her wagon, she noticed a small gathering forming, curious townspeople eager to assess the new schoolteacher. Among them stood a tall figure leaning against a hitching post, arms crossed over his chest. Unlike the other men, whose eyes raked over her with undisguised interest, this one's gaze was steady, respectful. He tipped his hat slightly when their eyes met, and Zara quickly looked away, tightening her grip on her small traveling case. Cowboys were all the same, no matter how polite their manners might appear. She had not come to Silver Creek for romance. She had come to escape men exactly like him. Little did she know that Vaughn Galloway would upend everything she thought she understood about survival in the West. 3 days later, Zara was organizing her small schoolhouse when the door creaked open. She turned, expecting one of her new pupils, or perhaps their mother, only to find herself face to face with the cowboy from her arrival day. In the clear light of morning, she could see him better, 25 or 26 years old, with sun-bronzed skin, dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and eyes the color of a summer sky. Unlike many frontier men, he was clean-shaven, revealing a strong jaw that softened when he smiled. "Miss Mitchell." He removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. "I'm Vaughn Galloway. I run the Circle G just north of town." Zara took an instinctive step back. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Galloway?" Her tone was cool, professional. "Actually, I'm here to help you." He gestured toward the large bookcase she'd been struggling to move. "Mayor Simmons mentioned you might need assistance setting up the schoolhouse." "I can manage, thank you." Zara moved to place herself between Vaughn and her desk, as if establishing a boundary. Something flickered in his eyes, not anger or offense, but understanding. "Of course, just thought I'd offer." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Mitchell, I know newcomers can find Silver Creek a bit overwhelming. If you need anything, directions, supplies, or just someone to show you the safer trails for riding, my offer stands." After he left, Zara pressed her hands against the desk, steadying herself. There was something disarming about Vaughn Galloway that made her defensive walls feel suddenly insufficient. It wasn't his looks, though he was undeniably handsome. It was the absence of the predatory edge she'd come to expect from cowboys. And that, somehow, felt more dangerous than any threat. The incident that changed everything happened 3 weeks later. Zara had taken her students for a nature study along the creek that gave the town its name. They were collecting leaves and rocks, laughing in the autumn sunshine, when 12-year-old Thomas Wilson wandered too close to a patch of unstable ground near the water's edge. The boy's scream tore through the peaceful afternoon as the earth gave way beneath him. Zara rushed forward, her heart pounding, only to see Thomas clinging desperately to exposed roots, the rushing water churning beneath him. "Hold on, Thomas," she called, dropping to her knees and reaching for him. But the distance was too great, the position too precarious. Suddenly, there was the thunder of hoofbeats. Vaughn Galloway appeared as if conjured from the air itself, leaping from his horse while it was still in motion. Without hesitation, he moved past Zara and lowered himself over the edge, anchoring his boots against rocks as he reached for the boy. "I've got you, son," he said, his voice steady despite the danger. "Miss Mitchell, take my belt. I need an anchor." Zara hesitated only a fraction of a second before grabbing the leather belt at Vaughn's waist, bracing herself against a nearby tree. With methodical calm, Vaughn pulled Thomas to safety, the boy's clothes soaked and his face pale with fear. Only when Thomas was safely surrounded by his classmates did Vaughn turn his attention to Zara. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "I'm fine," she replied automatically, though her hands trembled. "How did you know?" "I was checking fences nearby." He glanced at the frightened children. "Let me help you get them back to town." As they walked the children back, Thomas clinging to Vaughn's hand with complete trust, Zara found her carefully constructed beliefs beginning to crack. This cowboy had risked himself without hesitation to save a child. It contradicted everything she thought she knew. "Thank you," she said quietly as they reached the schoolhouse. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "But nothing happened," Vaughn interrupted gently. "The boy's safe. That's what matters." He knelt to speak to Thomas. "You were brave today. Holding on like that took real courage." As the children filed inside, Vaughn turned to leave. "Mr. Galloway," Zara called after him. Would you like to stay for tea?" "As a thank you." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'd like that very much, Miss Mitchell." That cup of tea became the first crack in the wall Zara had built around her heart. Over the following weeks, Zara found Vaughn appearing in her life with increasing frequency. He brought books for the school, adventure stories for the boys, poetry for the girls, and scientific journals that made Zara's eyes light up with interest. He fixed the leaky roof of the schoolhouse before the first snow fell. He escorted her home when darkness came early, always maintaining a respectful distance. One evening in late October, as they walked the short distance from the schoolhouse to her small rented cottage, Zara found herself asking, "Why are you being so kind to me?" Vaughn considered her question with the same thoughtfulness he seemed to apply to everything. "Because everyone deserves kindness, especially those who bring learning to frontier children. Most cowboys I've known aren't concerned with education," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Most cowboys you've known," he repeated carefully. "Miss Mitchell, I get the feeling you've had experiences that have colored your view of men like me." They had reached her cottage door. In the golden light of the setting sun, Vaughn's face was open, honest in a way that made it hard for Zara to maintain her guard. "My father was killed by cowboys," she said, the admission startling her as much as it seemed to surprise him. 5 years ago, they wanted free goods from our store. When he refused, she looked away. I watched it happen." Vaughn removed his hat, holding it against his chest, a gesture of respect that seemed instinctive rather than calculated. "I'm deeply sorry, Miss Mitchell. There are violent men in every profession, but that doesn't make the pain any less." He paused. "If my presence makes you uncomfortable, it doesn't," she interrupted, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Not anymore." The smile that touched his lips was gentle. "Then I'll keep bringing books for your students, if that's all right." "I'd like that," she replied, finding herself returning his smile. As Vaughn said goodnight and turned to leave, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the tentative unfurling of hope, like the first green shoot breaking through snow at winter's end. The town's harvest festival in November became the setting for their first dance. Zara had initially refused all offers, but when Vaughn approached, his hand extended and his eyes asking a question that was about more than just a dance, she found herself accepting. "Everyone's watching," she murmured as they moved to the fiddle's melody. Let them, Vaughn replied, his hand steady at her waist. I'm only concerned with your comfort, Miss Mitchell. Zara, she said impulsively. When we're not in school, I think you could call me Zara. His smile warmed her more than the nearby bonfire. Zara, he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. Then I'm Vaughn to you. As they danced, Zara became increasingly aware of whispers around them. When the music ended, she overheard Mrs. Peterson, the butcher's wife, speaking in a low voice to another woman. A schoolteacher and a rancher. It won't last. Not with his past. What did she mean? Zara asked as Vaughn walked her home later that evening. About your past? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. I wasn't always the man you see now, he finally said. After the war, I drifted. Did things I'm not proud of. But that was before I found Silver Creek, before I built something worth protecting. What changed you? She asked. Vaughn stopped walking, turning to face her fully in the moonlight. I saw what I was becoming, and I didn't like it. So I chose differently. His voice dropped lower. People can change, Zara, if they want it badly enough. In that moment, standing in the silver glow of the Montana night, Zara realized she was changing too, her certainties crumbling, her fear giving way to something more complex and frightening, trust. The change terrified her. The first snow of winter-blanketed Silver Creek in mid-December. Zara had been at the general store when it began, and by the time she finished her shopping, the world had transformed into a swirling white landscape that obscured the path back to her cottage. You can't walk home in this, Mrs. Wilson, Thomas's mother, said firmly. You'll get lost 10 feet from the door. Before Zara could protest, the store's door swung open, bringing with it a gust of snow and Vaughn Galloway, his shoulders already dusted white. I thought I might find you here, he said, stomping snow from his boots. My wagon's outside. I can take you home. The ride to her cottage was slow, the horses trudging carefully through deepening snow. Huddled beneath a thick buffalo hide beside Vaughn, Zara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket. Will your cattle survive this? She asked, watching his profile as he concentrated on guiding the team. They're hardy, and we've prepared well, he replied. The men will ride shifts to check the herds. It's the way of things out here. You prepare for the worst and hope for the best. When they reached her cottage, Zara realized her small woodpile was nearly buried. Without being asked, Vaughn unloaded a substantial stack of firewood from his wagon and carried it to her porch. This should keep you warm for a few days, he said, brushing snow from his coat. I'll bring more when the storm breaks. Thank you. The words seemed inadequate for all he'd done. On impulse, she added, would you like to come in? I could make coffee. Something flickered in his eyes. Longing, perhaps, quickly controlled. Better not, he said gently. Town gossips have sharp eyes, even in a blizzard. I don't care what they say, Zara replied, surprising herself with the realization that it was true. I care about your reputation, Vaughn said. A schoolteacher needs the town's respect. As he prepared to leave, Zara caught his arm. Vaughn, wait. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been growing in her mind. Why do you keep helping me when I've given you so little in return? Vaughn's gaze was steady, his voice quiet but clear even against the wind. Because some things are worth waiting for. The simple honesty of his words stayed with Zara long after his wagon disappeared into the swirling snow. Christmas Eve brought an unexpected invitation. Dinner at the Circle G Ranch. Zara stood uncertainly before the imposing two-story ranch house, larger and more elegant than she had imagined. Her green wool dress, her best, suddenly seemed inadequate. The door opened before she could knock, and Vaughn stood there, dressed not in his usual working clothes, but in a crisp white shirt and dark vest. You came, he said, relief and pleasure evident in his voice. I nearly didn't, she admitted. I've never been to a ranch before. Then I'm honored the Circle G is your first. He guided her inside to a great room warmed by a massive stone fireplace. A Christmas tree stood in one corner, decorated with paper stars and candles, while a long table was set for dinner. To Zara's surprise, the ranch hands, 7 in total, stood respectfully as she entered. Vaughn introduced each man by name, and Zara realized these cowboys were nothing like the brutal men who had killed her father. They were weathered, certainly, but their eyes were kind, their manners impeccable. The boys wanted to meet the schoolteacher who's been improving their boss's vocabulary, said an older man named Charlie, his eyes twinkling. He's been using mighty fancy words lately. Dinner was a revelation, not just the abundance of food or the genuine camaraderie, but the way Vaughn's men clearly respected him. They deferred to him not out of fear, but with genuine affection. This was a family of sorts, bound not by blood but by choice and shared purpose. After dinner, while the men sang Christmas carols with surprising harmony, Vaughn led Zara to his study. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Merry Christmas, Zara." Inside was a leather-bound edition of Tennyson's poems, its pages gilded, its cover embossed. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the cover. "Open it," Vaughn urged gently. On the first page was an inscription in elegant handwriting. "To Zara, who teaches others to see the beauty in words. May you find joy in these. With admiration, Vaughn." "Admiration," she repeated softly. "And more," he admitted, his eyes holding hers. "If you'd allow it." The moment stretched between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Zara felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force as inevitable as gravity. The study door banged open as Charlie burst in. "Riders coming, boss." Looking like trouble. The spell broke. Vaughn was immediately alert, the rancher replacing the man who had stood before her moments ago. "Stay here," he told Zara, already moving toward the door. But Zara followed, something inside her refusing to hide, while Vaughn faced whatever threat approached. From the porch, she could see 5 riders approaching through the snow, their horses picking their way carefully up the long drive. Even from a distance, there was something menacing in their posture. "Wilson's men," Charlie muttered. "Bastards pick Christmas Eve to make trouble." "Language, Charlie," Vaughn said mildly, though his hand rested near his holstered pistol. "We have a lady present." The riders stopped at the foot of the porch steps. Their leader, a heavy-set man with a cruel twist to his mouth, surveyed the scene with obvious disdain. "Galloway," he called. "Time to reconsider our offer. Boss wants this land, and he's tired of asking nice." "And I'm tired of giving the same answer, Delaney," Vaughn replied evenly. "The Circle G isn't for sale. Not to Wilson or anyone else." Delaney's eyes shifted to Zara, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Got yourself a woman, I see. Shame if something was to happen to her schoolhouse. Fires are common in winter." Vaughn's posture changed subtly, a tensing that reminded Zara of a wolf preparing to attack. "You're threatening a lady on Christmas Eve," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "That's not just bad manners, Delaney. It's suicidal." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats before Delaney spat into the snow. "This ain't over, Galloway. Not by a long shot." As the riders departed, Zara realized she was trembling, not with fear, but with a strange exhilaration. She had seen Vaughn ready to defend not just his land, but her as well, yet there had been no gleeful violence in him, only controlled resolve. "Who is Wilson?" she asked when they were alone again. "Cattle baron from Wyoming," Vaughn explained. "Wants to expand north. Men like him think everything has a price." "And your ranch doesn't?" His eyes met hers, intensity burning in their blue depths. "Some things are beyond price, Zara. Land that was earned honestly. People you care for. Principles that define who you are." In that moment, something fundamental shifted in Zara's understanding of Vaughn Galloway. This wasn't a man who would ever use violence for sport or cruelty. This was a man who had built something meaningful and would protect it, and those he cared for, with unwavering resolve. It was the most attractive quality she had ever encountered in another human being. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a transformation in Silver Creek. The schoolhouse flourished under Zara's care, while Vaughn's visits became a regular occurrence that the town quickly accepted as natural. They rode together on Sundays, picnicked by the creek when weather permitted, and shared books and conversations that deepened their connection. Yet for all their growing closeness, Vaughn never pressed for more than Zara freely offered. When their hands touched, he would smile but not grasp. When they said goodnight, he would bow slightly but never attempt to kiss her. His patience was both frustrating and comforting, a safe space in which Zara found herself healing from wounds she had carried for years. On a warm May evening, as they walked back from a town meeting, Zara finally asked the question that had lingered between them. "Why have you never tried to kiss me?" Vaughn stopped walking, his expression serious in the fading light. "Because when you kissed me, he said softly. I wanted it to be your choice, not something taken. The simplicity of his answer, the profound respect it represented, moved Zara in ways she couldn't articulate. Standing on her tiptoes, she pressed her lips gently to his. It was a brief kiss, innocent by most standards, but when she pulled away, Vaughn's eyes held a depth of emotion that took her breath away. I've been waiting for that, he whispered. I know, she replied. You said you'd wait until I was ready. His smile illuminated his entire face. And I would have waited forever if necessary. That night, Zara slept more peacefully than she had in years, her dreams filled not with the violence of her past, but with possibilities for her future. The shattering of that peace came unexpectedly one June afternoon. Zara was at the schoolhouse, preparing lessons for the following day, when Sheriff Taylor appeared at her door, his expression grave. Miss Mitchell, there's trouble, he said without preamble. Wilson's men burned out one of Circle G's line camps last night. 2 of Galloway's hands were injured. Zara's heart contracted painfully. And Vaughn, he's at the doctor's. Not hurt. The sheriff added quickly, seeing her alarm. But, Miss Mitchell, there's something you should know. About Galloway's past. The walk to the doctor's office felt interminable. When she arrived, Zara found Vaughn sitting beside a bed where one of his ranch hands lay bandaged and sedated. Zara, he said, standing immediately. The relief in his voice was palpable, but there was something else in his expression, wariness, perhaps even fear. Sheriff Taylor said there was trouble, she began. Wilson's men attacked at midnight, Vaughn confirmed. Jim and Pete were on watch. They'll recover, but now Silver Creek knows who you really are, came a new voice. A tall, gray-haired man in an expensive suit stood in the doorway. Or should I say, who you were. Marshal Edwards, Vaughn acknowledged, his posture stiffening. I didn't expect you so soon. Telegraphs move faster than horses, Galloway, the marshal replied. His eyes shifted to Zara. Ma'am, has your friend here told you about his days riding with the Cassidy gang? The room seemed to tilt beneath Zara's feet. What? Marshal Edwards continued relentlessly. Vaughn Galloway was one of the most wanted men in 3 territories before he disappeared 5 years ago. Robberies, cattle rustling, never murder, Vaughn interrupted fiercely. I never took a life, Edwards. Small consolation to those you robbed. The marshal replied coldly. Zara looked between the 2 men, her mind struggling to reconcile the Vaughn she knew with this revelation. Is this true? She asked, her voice barely audible. Vaughn's eyes, when they met hers, were filled with resignation and regret. Yes, he said simply. After the war, I fell in with bad company. Did things I'm not proud of. But I left that life behind years ago. Bought this land legitimately with money I earned honestly after I walked away. Why didn't you tell me? Zara's voice cracked on the question. Because I wanted you to know who I am now, not who I was then. Vaughn took a step toward her, stopping when she instinctively backed away. Zara, I've spent 5 years trying to make amends, to build something good. He's also been cooperating with my office, Marshal Edwards added unexpectedly, providing information that helped bring down the rest of the gang last year. Is that why Wilson wants your land? Zara asked, pieces falling into place. Because he knows your past? He's blackmailing you. Vaughn nodded slowly. He threatened to expose me if I didn't sell. Said he'd make sure everyone knew they had an outlaw in their midst. The irony was bitter. The man she had feared because he was a cowboy was actually dangerous for entirely different reasons. Or had been, once. I need time, Zara said, backing toward the door. I need to think. Vaughn made no move to stop her. I understand, he said quietly. But Zara, everything between us has been real. Every word, every promise. She fled before the tears building behind her eyes could fall. For 3 days, Zara barely left her cottage, her mind in turmoil. Everything she thought she knew about Vaughn, and about herself, seemed suddenly uncertain. She had feared cowboys because of what they had done to her father, only to find herself falling in love with a former outlaw. The world had taken on a surreal quality, as if the solid ground beneath her feet had transformed into shifting sand. On the 4th day, a knock at her door revealed Mrs. Wilson, Thomas's mother, standing on her porch with a determined expression. You've been hiding long enough, the older woman said without preamble. May I come in? Once seated with tea before them, Mrs. Wilson wasted no time. The whole town's talking about Vaughn's past, But nobody's talking about what matters. Which is? Zara asked dully. 5 years of him being the finest man in this county, Mrs. Wilson replied firmly. 5 years of him helping every family that needed it, paying fair wages, standing against men like Wilson who'd run roughshod over smaller ranchers. She fixed Zara with a penetrating stare. You're judging him for who he was, not who he is. Isn't that exactly what you've been fighting against yourself? Being judged for preconceptions rather than truth. The parallels were uncomfortable. It's not the same, Zara protested weakly. Isn't it? You feared cowboys because of what some did to your father. But Vaughn proved not all cowboys are the same. Now you're ready to condemn him for a past he spent years atoning for. Mrs. Wilson set down her teacup with a decisive click. The question isn't who he was before he came here. It's who he is now, and who you are when you're with him. After Mrs. Wilson left, Zara sat for a long time, turning the older woman's words over in her mind. The sun was setting when another knock came at her door. This time, it was Marshall Edwards. I'm not here officially, Miss Mitchell, he said, refusing her offer to sit. Just wanted to say my piece before I leave town tomorrow. About Vaughn? She asked. The marshal nodded. I've hunted many men in my career. Most never change their ways. Galloway is different. When he contacted my office voluntarily 3 years ago, offering information to help bring down his former associates, I thought it was a trick. He smiled slightly. It wasn't. He's paid his debt, as far as I'm concerned. The law has no further interest in him. Why tell me this? Zara asked. Because good men are rare on the frontier, Miss Mitchell, and men who find the courage to change are rarer still. He tipped his hat. Good evening. As the door closed behind the marshal, Zara made her decision. She needed to see Vaughn, not to condemn or absolve him, but to understand. If their relationship had any chance of survival, it would be built on truth, however difficult. The Circle G was quiet in the gathering dusk as Zara's rented horse carried her up the long drive. The ranch house stood dark except for a single light in Vaughn's study. Her knock went unanswered, so she tried the door, finding it unlocked. Inside, the house felt unnaturally still. She made her way to the study where she found Vaughn standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his expression more desolate than she had ever seen it. Zara, he said, straightening in surprise. I didn't hear you arrive. The door was unlocked, she explained. That seems dangerous for a man with enemies. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Maybe I'm not as reformed as I thought. In the lamplight, Zara could see the toll the past days had taken on him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually clean-shaven face showed several days' growth of beard. He looked like a man who had lost something essential. I came to ask you something, she said, remaining near the door. One question, and I need the absolute truth. Vaughn set down his glass. Anything. Why did you change? Not how, but why? What made you walk away from that life? He was silent for so long Zara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I killed a man, he said quietly. Not directly. I didn't pull the trigger. But during a robbery, an old shopkeeper tried to stop us. One of the gang knocked him down. He hit his head. Vaughn's eyes, when they met hers, were haunted. I saw his daughter screaming over his body as we rode away. The parallel to her own experience was so stark that Zara felt physically ill. When was this? 5 years ago. Austin, Texas. The room seemed to spin around her. What was the name of the shop? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Mitchell's Dry Goods, Vaughn replied, watching her face carefully. Zara, I didn't know. Not until Marshall Edwards mentioned your background yesterday. I swear to God. It was too much, the coincidence too cruel, the connection too painful. Zara pressed her hand against the door frame to steady herself. You were there, she whispered. When my father died. Vaughn made no attempt to deny it or defend himself. Yes, he said simply. And that day changed everything for me. I couldn't sleep without seeing his face. Yours. I left the gang the next morning, rode north, and didn't stop until I found a place where I could try to become someone different. Someone better. The irony was almost unbearable. For 5 years, Zara had feared and hated cowboys because of what they had done to her father. Now she discovered that the cowboy who had captured her heart had been present at that very tragedy, and that same event had been the catalyst for his transformation. I'll go, Vaughn said into the silence. Sell the ranch. Move on. You'll never have to see me again. Is that what you want? Zara asked. What I want doesn't matter, he replied, his voice rough. Not after what my choices cost you. Zara took a step forward, then another, until she stood directly before him. Your choices that day destroyed my world, she said, watching him flinch at her words. But your choices every day since have created something new and good. You didn't kill my father, Vaughn. You witnessed a tragedy and let it change you. How can you even look at me? He asked brokenly. Because I've seen who you truly are, Zara answered. Not who you were then, but who you've become. The man who saves children from drowning, who protects his workers, who waits patiently for a woman too afraid to trust. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached up to touch his face. I came here believing I could never forgive the men who took my father. Now I realize that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing not to be imprisoned by it. Zara, Vaughn whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, she acknowledged. But you've earned my love, and that's worth more. When he kissed her, it was with a gentleness that belied the intensity of his emotions. It was a kiss of gratitude, of wonder, of promise, and Zara returned it with equal fervor, the final walls around her heart crumbling like sand. The confrontation with Wilson came at dawn 3 days later. Vaughn and his men were prepared this time, positioned strategically around the ranch house when Wilson's force, 15 riders strong, appeared on the horizon. Stay inside, Vaughn told Zara, who had refused to leave the ranch despite the coming danger. No, she said firmly. We face this together. Wilson himself led the group, a corpulent man with cold eyes and expensive clothes that seemed out of place on the dusty Montana plain. He reined his horse at the foot of the porch steps where Vaughn waited, Zara at his side. Last chance, Galloway, Wilson called. Sell to me, or the whole territory learns they've harbored an outlaw. The territory already knows, came a voice from behind Wilson. Marshal Edwards rode forward, flanked by Sheriff Taylor and several deputies. And they don't seem to care much. Wilson's face purpled with rage. This is a private business matter, Marshal. Threatening a man on his own property isn't business, Edwards replied evenly. It's intimidation. And burning line shacks is arson, possibly attempted murder. You can't prove anything, Wilson blustered. One of your men talked, Sheriff Taylor interjected. Delaney wasn't happy about taking the blame alone. The standoff ended not with the violence Wilson had intended, but with his arrest. As the posse led him away, the would-be cattle baron shouted threats that sounded increasingly desperate until they faded into the distance. In the sudden quiet that followed, Vaughn turned to Zara. You stood with me, he said, wonder in his voice. Even knowing what might happen. I've spent too long running from fear, she replied. It's time I stood for something instead. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over Vaughn's land that was truly his now, free from threat or shadow, he took her hand in his. I've been thinking about your cottage in town, he said carefully. What about it? Zara asked. It's awfully small. His thumb traced patterns on her palm. And quite far from the circle G. A smile curved her lips. Are you suggesting an alternative, Mr. Galloway? I'm suggesting, he said, turning to face her fully, that this house is too big for one person. That the children of Silver Creek might benefit from having their teacher closer to the ranching families. That I've loved you since the moment you refused my help with that bookcase. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not ostentatious but beautifully crafted, a single diamond set in gold. I'm suggesting, Vaughn continued, his voice deepening with emotion, that if you could find it in your heart to marry a reformed outlaw, he would spend every day of his life making you happy. Zara looked at the ring, then at the man offering it. A man who had traveled the long road from darkness to light, who had faced his past with courage and built a future with determination. A man who had waited patiently for her to be ready. Yes, she said, joy bubbling through her like a spring. Yes, I'll marry you, Vaughn Galloway. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Zara realized that the journey that had brought her to Silver Creek had never been about escaping her past. It had been about finding her future, a future with a man who understood that true strength lay not in violence, but in patience, not in domination, but in respect. They were married in September, when the Montana landscape blazed with autumn colors. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held beneath the old cottonwood tree beside Silver Creek. Zara wore a gown of ivory satin, her honey blonde hair adorned with wildflowers, while Vaughn stood tall in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him. Their vows were simple but profound, promises not only of love and fidelity, but of understanding and growth, of building a life that honored both their pasts while creating something entirely new. "I once feared all cowboys," Zara said softly as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Until one said he would wait until I was ready. And I once thought redemption was impossible," Vaughn replied, holding her close. "Until I found a schoolteacher brave enough to show me otherwise." As the sun set over their gathered friends and the land that had brought them together, Zara and Vaughn Galloway stepped into their future, not as people defined by fear or past mistakes, but as partners who had found in each other the courage to become their best selves. The frontier that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving now stretched before them, full of possibility, their love a shelter stronger than any structure of wood or stone. Together, they had discovered the most profound truth of the American West, that even in the wildest places, the human heart could find its home.